Oh,
Well,
absolutely.
good
Before we
afternoon,
get
everybody,
absolutely.
and welcome to the Douglas Aveling Scott Memorial Gallery here in Feinberg Library. I am delighted you are all able to come out on this beautiful autumn afternoon and join us here. Feel the sunshine filtering through the leaves, and it's just great. My name is Andrew Buxer, and I'm the director of the Jewish Studies program here at SUNY Plattsburgh. And this afternoon, we are very privileged to have a chance to meet and talk with Julie Canepa, who is the author of the recently published novel, The Missing Star. And she's going to read us today a few selections from the novel. But before that, we are going to have a chance to discuss it with her in a discussion led by Dr. Jonathan Slater, and we hope that all of you will take part in the discussion as well. Now, this is the first of two events we are holding to honor the late Professor Vladimir Munk, who was a beloved professor of chemistry here for many years and a person who symbolized a lot of things to people in the Jewish community in Plattsburgh. At 6:30, we are going to be showing a film, screening a film called Return to Auschwitz, The Survival of Vladimir Munk, which was produced by three of the people in this room, including Julie. And we are going to be screening that 6:30 in Hudson 106, the big lecture hall there. And I hope you'll be able to join us for that as well. After the showing, the filmmakers are going to be here to answer questions and discuss it as well. So we're looking forward to that very much. Before we get started, though, I'd just like to invite President of SUNY Plattsburgh, Dr. Alex Enyedi, up to say a few words.
Thank you, Rick. And I know that sometimes it's a bit of a risk to say I'm going to say a few words, so I'll begin. So good afternoon, each and every one of you. I'm very pleased to welcome you as we honor the important memory of the remarkable Dr. Vladimir Munk. This event serves as a poignant reminder of the power of stories, the power of resilience of the human spirit, and the importance of learning from history. I especially appreciate that we're here together in the Douglas and Eileen Scott Holocaust Memorial Gallery, which opened in 2012 thanks to the generous support of our alumni and friends. Named for Professor Emeritus and College Historian Douglas Scott and his wife, Adeline, she was a former registrar. This gallery represents our university's commitment and obligation to ensure that the Holocaust will never be forgotten at SUNY Plattsburgh. I'd also like to thank a few special guests here this evening with us. First of all, a thank you to Julie Canepa, local author and filmmaker, for telling Dr. Munk's story. She will be speaking more about this in just a bit. And if you haven't seen the documentary, come back at 6:30, so thanks for that. I'd also like to thank Dr. Jonathan Slater, Professor Emeritus of Public Relations here at SUNY Plattsburgh. Dr. Slater retired in 2022 after a very long and distinguished career here at the university, in which he served with distinction in a remarkable number of leadership positions. These included service as chair of the Department of Journalism and Public Relations, director of the Institute of Ethics and Public Life, faculty advisor to Hillel, and founding director of the Jewish Studies program. An internationally recognized authority on public relations and ethics, Dr. Slater has brought his expertise not only to SUNY, but to corporations, publishers, community groups in the North Country and around the United States. And as you've heard from Dr. Buxer, Dr. Slater will lead this afternoon's discussion. And if any of Dr. Munk's family is present, I wish to extend a warm welcome to SUNY Plattsburgh and extend my deepest condolences for your loss. For 21 years, Dr. Munk served as our campus professor of biochemistry, but he left an indelible mark both academically and on the lives of the students and colleagues that he served with. Dr. Munk's journey to our institution was nothing short of extraordinary. As a Holocaust survivor, he and his beloved wife, Kitty Lowy, found refuge in Plattsburgh amidst a turbulent period in this world's history. Little did he know that his initial visit as a visiting professor would turn into a lifelong commitment as a SUNY Plattsburgh recognized his immense talent and devotion. While Dr. Munk's illustrious career both in Prague and in the United States were a testament to his dedication to scientific excellence, his true legacy transcends his professional achievements. He was an exceptional educator, guiding students towards their dreams with the same passion that fueled his own aspirations. Although Dr. Munk's life was marked by adversity, it was defined by his unwavering spirit and dedication to education. While the horrors of World War II forced him to endure unspeakable violence, his willingness to share his experiences as a Holocaust survivor and his commitment to teaching the lessons of history to younger generations were a master class in true connection and education beyond the classroom, not only suffering, but of survival. It is my sincere hope that Dr. Munk's memory inspires us all to insist on and strive for a more safer, a more equitable, and a more peaceful world. May it encourage us to learn from history so that the atrocities such as those he experienced are never tolerated. And may his legacy always remind us that in the face of incredible adversity, hope and perseverance can and always triumph. Back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Well, let me turn this over now to Jonathan.
Thank you, Andy. I'd like to thank Dr. Enyedi and Dr. Buxer, and also extend a welcome to two of our vice presidents, Vice President Hansen and Vice President Hurd, and also to recognize the presence of my successor at the Ethics Institute, Dr. Dan Lake. I'll echo some of President Enyedi's remarks. Welcome to the Douglas and Evelyn Skopp Holocaust Memorial Gallery. And it's fitting that we're holding this tribute to Professor Munk here in the gallery. Professor Munk was one of the few Jews fortunate to escape alive from the Holocaust, in which Nazis murdered 6 million of us. Behind me, here, just to draw your attention, is Dr. Herb Savel's memorial, wood carving memorial, to just a handful of the thousands of murdered children of France who do not survive their deportation to the killing centers. It's also appropriate that we are gathered in this gallery to talk about a book whose theme is the Holocaust. Julie Canepa has written and published a very impressive novel, which we'll talk about in just a minute or so. It's a work of fiction, but the characters, the settings, and the historical context are all real. Professor Doug Skopp, too, wrote a heart-rending novel, Shadows Walking, set in the lead-up and during the Holocaust. The characters were fictional, but the story of the evils of Nazi medicine are starkly real in his book. But we're here to talk about The Missing Star, and there are copies available. They're on sale, and Julie will be happy to sign your copy after we're done here this evening. But we're here to talk about The Missing Star and to hear from Julie. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me here. And if you haven't seen the documentary that Julie was co-creator of, I strongly urge you to come to Hudson Hall at 6:30 and watch this marvelous film. So you are co-creator of that documentary about Professor Munk's return to Auschwitz at the age of 95. And you accompanied him there, which is also quite amazing. So how did you come to write The Missing Star? And to what extent did your time researching the documentary and producing the documentary influence the creation of this story?
So I think it was basically a very a multi-step journey and a very circuitous route. And it all started with meeting Vladimir. And I like to say that sometimes when you meet someone in your life, bells and whistles don't go off and you don't realize what an impact they're going to have on your life. And I met him in some very ordinary circumstances, and meeting him from all of these past few years literally changed the trajectory of my life. So most of this was unplanned. But our friendship began when I was doing some research for a series of articles for the Sun Community News, and that was about Vladimir. And during that time, I spent every Sunday afternoon with him at his apartment in Lake Forest, and we would have some of his slivovitz or maybe perhaps a glass of wine, and he would tell me stories from his childhood and stories from his time under German occupation and stories about his wife's life as well, his wife Kitty. And so I wrote that series of articles, and it was very eagerly anticipated. They released them every 2 weeks, and people started stopping him in the grocery store and saying, when is the next article coming out? And they just really wanted to know about this period of his life, from his childhood to liberation. And so over this time, we just developed this very warm friendship, very unique friendship, and based on other, mutual interests. And he loved to cook, and he loved to, show off his knowledge of wine. And so we had spent many enjoyable afternoons talking, and we had become very close. And at a certain point, he received a letter from the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation, and they were getting ready to send as many surviving Holocaust members to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. And when he received the letter, for some reason, he thought it would be a good idea for me to go with him. And that was actually kind of shocking. And then so he called and he said, yes, we're coming. And then they said, we're full, we can't accommodate you. And so then we weren't going. And so then they called him back and they said, we can accommodate you, and you and a companion we will provide your travel and all your expenses to go to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary. And prior to that, after writing his story, I felt like it should be preserved in some other way other than just these articles. And so I had reached out to Paul Frederick, and I asked him if he would come and just, we could interview Vladimir and get it on video. And there was no future plan for that video, but we just wanted to just get that down for posterity. So when this opportunity to go to Auschwitz arrived, and I called Paul and told him, he said, we have to follow you. We have to see if we can accompany you on this journey. Because it was very important for Vladimir to go and honor all of his relatives that had perished there. Mm-hmm. So to get back to your question a little bit more directly, the trip to Auschwitz was very concise, and what we wanted to do was, I'd already told his story in the series of articles, and then we were going to the camp, and he was going to, we didn't know what was going to transpire, but we were going to walk with him and just experience those moments with him. And when we returned, I realized that in our conversations, he had told us a lot of other stories that we weren't going to be able to fit into a 56-minute documentary, and they were stories that really needed to be told. So it was really at that point that I like to say, I made the mistake of saying, I want to write a book about you. And so he thought that was a good idea. And that was in probably the summer of 2020. And so 3 years later, the book was published, and it includes a lot of those stories that I felt were really important that needed to be told.
Well, The Missing Star, of course, it's a Holocaust novel, this story that you wrote about Vladimir and Kitty. But it's also a romance in many ways. So why, after the documentary and this of course, the trip that became the documentary, did you feel compelled to consolidate these stories into a novel rather than a documentary format book?
Well, I had already written, with the series of articles for The Sun, I had already written something that was very biographical. And it was, it didn't start out being a novel. It was going to be more of a memoir. And I think, you know, when you start on one of these journeys where I had never written a book before, so I said I was going to write a book. It was going to sort of take a memoir form, and then all these other series of events that happened that you sort of just little synchronicities and things that happen along the way. A conversation with his daughter-in-law where she told me that Vladimir's wife Kitty had, that her story had kind of taken like a back seat to Vladimir's, because Vladimir's story was, his history was very evident. If you saw him in the summertime, you saw his tattoo, you knew he had been to Auschwitz. It was something that was sometimes sort of whispered underneath conversations, but that was sort of a well-known fact. And what wasn't so well-known was that Kitty, they had actually met at a concentration camp in Czechoslovakia, Terezín. And she was a young girl who had been imprisoned at the age of 14 with her family, and she had remained there. She was never sent to Auschwitz. So somehow the impact of her story didn't seem as horrific somehow, although the conditions that they lived under at this other camp were oftentimes as horrific. There were just differences where they had the illusion of Jewish self-government at the camp in Terezín. They didn't have to wear uniforms. They wore regular clothing. So there was this appearance of things being a lot better than they were, but people were still starving. The elderly were dying daily. Many people were suffering from diseases just like they were at any other camp. So she had her own stories. And when that was brought to my attention, I felt like now it changes how I want to approach this, because I wanted to tell these important stories from his childhood that I hadn't yet told, but then I also felt like Kitty deserved equal time. So that sort of changed it into, I felt like the novel format was going to work better. I was going to have to create conversations, and then it sort of fell into place that I would tell a chapter about Vladimir's life and then a chapter about Kitty's life, and it just followed. Everything fell into place from there, and it sort of seemed like that was where I was going the whole time, because that's how the story was best told. Both their stories were best told.
So what's next for you, Julie? Are there any plans to develop Professor Munk's story further in some other format, for example? And another sort of connected question, what do you feel has been your contribution through the documentary and through this book? What do you feel your contribution has been to furthering the understanding of the Holocaust?
So those are two big questions. So, I mean, to the first one, I think if you read the book, I feel like it's very visual. If anybody wants to ask me if they want to make it into a movie, I'm pretty open to the idea. But also almost as a teaching tool, because I will say that writing the book, I wanted it to be a YA novel, because I feel like when we've brought the film out in front of middle school and high school students, they're so responsive to it, and it's a great age to introduce this topic, and they become very enthralled, and even if they never talk to their parents, all of a sudden they're asking questions. So I had really hoped that the book would be shorter so that it would find a younger audience, and that still may be possible. So I would certainly love to see that. I feel like I've told these stories to their fullness. There's a whole wonderful backstory of Vladimir's father being in the Czech Legion and crossing Siberia on the Trans-Siberian on a train during World War I. And so if anything, I would do a prequel to the book. It's just a very fascinating story there. Vladimir's, he was a teacher, and during the time that he taught here, he never discussed his Holocaust past. He really was just focused on, you know, teaching students to the best of his ability. He was a wonderful mentor. We just had there was a memorial service for him this weekend, and the students that he mentored from classes of like 72 and you know, thereafter, were at the memorial. He just forged these amazing long-term relationships over, you know, microbiology of all things. And afterward, it was so important to him. He did his family genealogy, his and Kitty's, and he saw what they had lost, and it was so important to him to go into the schools in our region and talk to hundreds and hundreds of school kids who wrote him amazing letters over the years, and he just, his physical presence in those classrooms really made such an impact on the students. But we've seen the same thing with the film. As I said, it just really inspires conversation in kids that just normally wouldn't even open up. Something about his relatability, his humor, his humanity really touches people and allows that goal of his to educate to continue, and the same with the book. So I feel really privileged to have been able to tell his story in that way.
Would you read some passages for us?
Sure. I can just do that from here. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It really just, it seems so bittersweet to be here without him sitting next to me. It really, really does. And by the time he held the book in his hand, he was very mad at me because it was taking me so long, because I never wrote a book before, so it took me 3 years to write it. And when he did finally hold it in his hands, and he held the hardcover, and he said, "Oh, this is quite a book." And so I was like, "Oh, okay." It's like I got his approval, yay! So, but he did finally get to see it in the end. So one of the things, when I talk about his relatability, you know, I was telling the stories, their childhood stories, and through German occupation in this book, but when it's a journey where you're seeing that Czechoslovakia between the two world wars was so beautiful and full of promise and just exciting and peaceful, and that was the world that Vladimir and Kitty grew up in. And so you have to know them then, and then see how things unfold in order to feel their humanity and feel for the things that transpire later in their lives. So this is a story about Vladimir from his childhood with his buddies, because he used to just like to hang out with his friends like any other kid that was like 11 years old. Ivan and Milan stood in front of the Grand Cinema movie theater in the center of town, waving their arms at Vladya, beckoning him to walk faster. "Hurry up, Vladya," Ivan scolded his friend. "The movie's going to start any minute now." The sun was blinding, and a thin film of sweat shone on Vladya's forehead from his walk across town. The three friends had met nearly every Saturday afternoon that summer at the theater, buying their tickets at the box office for the matinee and settling into front row seats, letting the cool darkness envelop them. For 2 hours, Vladya's love of books was temporarily displaced by the on-screen adventures of American film actor Tom Mix. The boys watched the screen intently, never taking their eyes off the hero as he galloped across rolling plains littered with boulders on his trusty steed, Tony the Wonder Horse. Along the way, Tom encountered gangs of villains and saved farms from the evil tax collector. When the film's final credits finished scrolling, the boys exited the theater, hotly debating which of Tom's narrow escapes from death-defying situations were worthiest of merit. "Did you see the way he swam up to the ceiling as the cellar was filling up with water? He must have held his breath for 2 whole minutes." Ivan puffed his cheeks out, imitating his hero. "What about the clever way he escaped from that pack of wolves?" added Milan, shaking his head reverently. It was no secret among his friends that Vladya's favorite Tom Mix film was The Miracle Rider. It was the stuff heroes were made for, A greedy oil baron threatens the livelihood of an entire Indian reservation, and the oil baron gets his comeuppance when Tom devises a scheme to run him off the tribal land. Vladya eagerly anticipated the moment Chief Blackwing came on screen and made Tom Mix an honorary chief of the tribe. Chief Blackwing wore a royal headdress made of leather and hundreds of feathers, and his long dark braids hung down over a beaded tunic. Vladya had seen the film twice and was awestruck by the chief each time. "What I wouldn't give to see an Indian in real life," Vladya added wistfully. The other boys nodded in agreement. "Are you sure you wouldn't rather see Shirley Temple?" Ivan teased, pushing Vladya off the sidewalk. Vladya shot Ivan a cautionary look, indicating that the topic was off limits for further conversation. Vladya had complained when his mother made him accompany her to the Grand Cinema to watch Shirley Temple in her film The Littlest Rebel. "What if my friends see me, Mammy? That movie is for girls," Vladya protested. Later, he admitted to his mother that it was a pretty good movie. It was a musical drama set during the United States Civil War. Vladya had never seen a black person in real life, and observing the interaction between Shirley Temple's character, Virgie, and the actor who portrayed the slave fascinated Vladya. When his friends found out he had gone to one of the child actress's films, their teasing had been relentless. When not in the company of his friends, Vladya spent hazy summer afternoons at his father's rustic cabin at Polubny on the marshy outskirts of Pardubice. The radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines told of the endless anti-Semitic decrees in Germany, and his father, Carl, experienced each shocking account as if he were a boxer absorbing physical blows to the body. He sought comfort in the simple pleasures at the cabin, fishing for carp off the end of a long wooden skiff and playing fetch with their dog Chiggy on the banks nearby. The area near the cabin was prone to flooding in the spring, the water rising to the meadow and sometimes the field beyond, but Carl preferred the silence of the cabin at its muddiest to dry ground and bad news. Vladya coasted on his bicycle down the gentle sloping hill to where the cabin stood, skidding to a stop. He waved to his father, who stood on the shore of the stream, casting his fishing line high over his head and into the water, a rum-soaked ball of bread on the hook as bait. "How's the fishing today, Tati?" Vladya shouted, cupping his hands to his mouth. "Get your pole, Vladya, they are really biting today." A smile spread over his father's face at the sight of his son. Chiggy's not here to bark at the geese and ruin the silence. Vladya ran to the side of the cabin where, propped against a wall, was a wooden fishing rod. He walked to the edge of the stream where his father stood, took a ball of bread from a tin, pushed the hook through it, and cast it out over the water. Father and son shared the lazy summer afternoon side by side in comfortable silence, casting and reeling in, the troubles of the outside world lost in the muffled sounds of life in the marsh. Vladya listened to the chirping of the crickets and breathed in the marsh's mossy redolence, not sure if he wanted summer vacation to come to an end. So that's a little bit about, and his parents called him Vladya. So throughout the book, his name is Vladya, and that's also what Kitty, how Kitty referred to him as well. And if you get any imagery in your mind, it's because Vladimir had the most amazing memory. So when he would tell these stories, you felt like you were there. And I actually did have the opportunity a little over a year ago to go to Prague and to walk some of these locations, these locales that he had told me about, because the book wasn't finished yet. And I thought maybe there's going to be this one piece that's going to tell me something different, or I'm going to feel something, or it's going to be different than I pictured in my mind. And it was like visiting a photograph that he had shown me, because I even went to this, a place where he used to go with his parents. It was it was like built in the 1500s, a big stone castle high up on a hill. And it was quiet and peaceful and just like he pictured it. And I could have pictured him and his parents dropping their bikes at the bottom of the hill and walking up the hill, and him playing on the ramparts there. So this is a story about Kitty, and his wife also. Vladimir knew all her stories, and she also recorded hours and hours of interviews with the Shoah Foundation. So I had those to use as a reference. And also she did some audio interviews that I was able to read the transcripts and listen to to be able to tell her story. And also, Kitty had a rather challenging relationship with her mother, but she had a wonderful governess who was with her until she turned 10. And so the governess's name is Oila, and Oila, before things start to turn complicated, brings Kitty to Vienna, to her home country of Austria for a vacation, for a holiday. Kitty spun in circles, her mittened hands out at her sides while snow fell gently over the Neue Market Square in Vienna. "Look at me, Oila," Kitty squealed with glee. It was early Sunday morning, and the square, lined with elegant cream-colored stone buildings with wrought iron balconies and ornate molding, was empty. Oila and Kitty were on their way to Catholic Mass. "I think everything in Vienna is prettier than it is in Teplitsa, Oila. In fact, I'm sure of it," Kitty said. Oila looked around at the light dusting of snow. It sparkled off every surface like a million tiny diamonds. "Silly girl," Oila replied. "I think you may be right." Kitty stopped spinning and looked at Oila. "Thank you for bringing me here, Oila," Kitty said. Her small face was serious, her cheeks pink from the cold. Oila brushed the snow from Kitty's coat and took her mittened hands in hers. "You know, I have always talked of bringing you here. Now here we are." Oila's voice was hoarse when she spoke. She turned away, leading Kitty over to the center of the square. "Kitty Lowy, I give you Donnerbrunnen." Oila held out her hands to indicate an aqua, bronze, and granite fountain. For years, Oila had told Kitty about the famous fountain, describing it in detail. The seated figure of Providentia, the Roman personification of foresight, rose from the center, one side of her billowy tunic lowered, leaving her breast exposed. Surrounding her were 4 naked cherubs, each holding a fish twice their size, allegories for the Danube. In the summertime, the fish spout streams of water that fall back into the pool, Oila recalled, her voice echoing a dreamlike quality. Kitty gazed up at the figure of the woman. "Oh, Oila, she's beautiful," Kitty exclaimed. "I wish I could throw a coin in the fountain and know my future." The statue cast her unseeing gaze off to the right. "What do you think she's looking at, Oila?" Kitty's eyes followed the statue's line of sight, and finding nothing of interest in that direction, she turned and looked in the other direction, her eyes landing on a building at the other end of the square. "She's looking in the wrong direction," Kitty said. She pointed to a building that was 7 stories high, a Viennese confection, every window framed with intricate white molding in the Baroque style. A lone round window occupied the top floor. Kitty pointed to it. "That is where I'm going to live when I grow up. I will look out the window onto the square, and every time my mother comes to visit, she will have to pass by the naked angels in the fountain," Kitty said, giggling at her own joke. Oila choked back a laugh. "If we were in Teplitsa, I would have no choice but to reprimand you for your cheekiness," said Oila with mock seriousness. Kitty understood Oila's lack of reprimand as a signal that she could continue. "You know, Oila," Kitty said, a mischievous look on her face, "I don't think Mother has seen me naked since the day I was born." "Kitty Lowy." Oila looked at Kitty, shaking her head. Church bells began to peal in the distance. Oila, listening for the number of bells to mark the time. "Hurry, we're going to be late for Mass." She took Kitty by the hand and began to briskly walk in the direction of the church. Kitty looked around as she walked. People had begun to mill about the square. The sun had risen just over the tops of the buildings, everything under its warm glow and melting the sparkling snow, but not dispelling the magic. Kitty's first morning in Vienna was off to a wonderful start. I sat in on the bookstore, the Cornerstone bookstore had the book as their book of the month for their book club, and I sat in when the book club met, and it was interesting to hear people say that they were shocked, not shocked, but that they were sort of surprised that it's sort of, that the story sort of gently flows from their childhood, because so many things when you're telling a story about this horrible topic, you jump right into the action, that the horror is on the first page. It's you know, the SS beating someone, it's a train whistle, it's something horrific. And so there's enough of that to come, so I'm glad that that there was all this beauty in the beginning to be able to share with people. So it's up to you guys whether you want me to continue to. I mean, it's, you know, so the story evolves from there. And I can only tell you that when I think about the man that I knew and the woman that I only met very briefly before she passed, Kitty, Vladimir and Kitty, and when you read this story, even though I told it as a novel, you will know that these are real experiences that they recounted. And there's, it would be difficult to be shocked because of what we're hearing about right now, but if anything, the resilience and the hope and the love and the strength that is underlying within these people comes through and is a source of hope right now. So thank you very much for listening.
We do have some time for questions and comments, so please feel free. Yes, go ahead.
So I heard you say that they were late for Mass. Was Kitty not Jewish? Or was that...
Kitty was Jewish, but Oyla was Catholic.
Right. Okay, and then how did Vladimir and Kitty meet?
They met at the camp that they were both interred at Terezin.
Oh, she was only 14.
Yes. She was maybe 15 by then.
So then when
Yeah.
did they get back together?
Well, they married in 1949. They did meet up after the war. So they were separated when he went to Auschwitz, and that was in 1944. They had been dating for over a year at that point. And then he was sent to Auschwitz and liberated. And Czechoslovakia, where they were, was not liberated really until May. And he just wandered in Poland for months, penniless, without his family. And then they had vowed to meet because she knew he was leaving on a train for the East. And they had vowed to meet in Prague if they both survived. And they did meet there after the war, but Kitty ended up going back to the United States until she was of age, and then she came back, and they were married in November of 1949. Their anniversary's coming up, November 12th.
Yes, go ahead.
Do you think that your friendship with him helped you to write this book instead of like you just reading articles about it? Like, do you think that helped develop her?
On two levels. Partly the commitment was the commitment to complete it was very tied to our relationship, our friendship. But to have the time that I had to hear these stories, hours and hours, and not just, we all have sort of like our standard lore, like we have those 10 stories that we tell, and he did have certain stories that he told from over those years of his life that he always told, but to have the opportunity to spend that time with him that I did, sometimes there was another layer of stories that came out that might, his memory might get jogged. So it was just really like a privilege and to have that opportunity to hear, you know, almost like another level of stories from him. So, thanks.
I just wanted to say thank you for giving them their humanity. We look at the numbers and we look at the horror of it, and we forget that these are people who had parents and grandparents who loved them, and it was so beautifully done in the book to ground them in their humanity, and then what happened to them. And that's a real gift,
Oh.
because now we're dealing with numbers again of people who are being in terrible situations. Sometimes we just forget they each have, it's a web, and it touches so many people. And it was such a moving book because I felt like I got to know them, and then what happened to them was that much.
Good. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that.
I'll questions, comments?
Oh, I was just wondering, were you able to show any of this to Vladimir as you went through the writing process?
So initially, when it was supposed to be more of a memoir, I would have a draft of a chapter and I would show it to him, and he would make corrections because he's a teacher, and he would tell me what I got wrong if it was, and it was great. I mean, it was perfect because, I wanted it to be set, like properly in the historical context and also to be true to his story. But it was funny because when it morphed into becoming a story where I was going to tell Kitty's story as well, once I presented that to him, I would give him a chapter about Kitty and he would read that very quickly and it would be fine, but then he would just want to wait for when's the next chapter about me? So, and then that one he would pore over. But he was basically one of my early beta reader, but it changed so much over time. But yes, he did get to read a lot of the early chapters, so.
Other questions, comments? Yes, Dan.
I don't meet a novelist every day, and I'm curious to know, quite apart from the subject matter, how you mentioned it was the first time you had written a novel, how you organized the novel and the process that you went through to organize something that large when you hadn't written anything anywhere near that large.
I don't think you want to use my process. I mean, I was going through pictures on my phone and I was looking at what my living room looked at. Like my husband is a saint. I mean, just initially I wasn't even writing chronologically, which was just, I don't even know why I did that. What I started doing, the way that it started was that there were the stories. And so those were the stories and they were scattered all over time. So they were some maybe from his childhood, he had told me a story, or so I would write about that. And then there would be one that was poignant. There's a funny story about a book falling in the latrine, so I would write about that, but that was took place in 1943. So at first it was really scattered. Somehow adding Kitty's life and stories to the mix and making that decision to alternate the chapters and to tell the story chronologically made it take shape and gave me a path to follow that I really was just sort of, before that I think I was clutching at straws, but that's sort of like the kismet of things coming together the way that they did, so.
Other questions? Maybe one last passage for us too.
Oh, did you have a question, Michael?
One thing, I guess it's obvious that your life would have changed by meeting him. I met him through you, I think, and he was an amazing guy. But could you say a little bit about maybe how his life changed by meeting you and getting the ability in his 90s? Very vibrant. I mean, to be able to tell stories, did that seem to be an important, healthy thing for him? I mean, did he really seem to want to do this? And I imagine he did, and that you provided something for him.
Yes, it's funny because there were moments along the way where he was concerned that people were going to think of him, only through the lens of being a Holocaust survivor. And he had won the Czech State Prize in science. He had won, the Chancellor's Award here. He had created like 20 patents when he was in Czechoslovakia. And so it made me think about, like the sort of symbiosis of our relationship and of our give and take. And for the majority of the time, he wanted to tell his story. And I think, but there was a time for it also. There was just a window. And I think it's another thing sort of like in the creative process where I feel like as our relationship was unfolding, these things were unfolding. When I met him, I never knew I would make a movie or write a book. He never knew he would be the source of a movie and the subject of a movie and the subject of a book. And so I think that, and I feel like it's something that he he really needed to do, that he needed, you know, I don't want to go so far as to say that it was, you know, cathartic, but he didn't talk about these stories unless we were together. And then we would shake it off and we would just enjoy things and talk about what he bought at Aldi's that day. So, you know, or just, you know, drink like the latest wine he you know, picked up at Dame's or something like that. But I feel like his life was, we both impacted each other's lives in ways that I don't think we really, no one could have anticipated, and no one would have really been able to measure. And our friendship was just so unique. He had friendships with a lot of, he really liked to surround himself with women later in life, but I mean, of all ages. But our relationship was definitely really unique. I mean, when the pandemic started, I was so worried. They had shut down Lake Forest, and I said, you have to email me every morning when you get up to take your medicine, because I need to know that you're okay. And, you know, so I have like hundreds of emails. Like, I just think, I don't know that anybody else has hundreds and hundreds of emails from him that, you know, saying like, I'm okay, what are you doing today? Or just, it would just be mundane stuff, but it was just a way of like staying connected and getting him through that. If anybody watches the movie later, you'll see that this relationship and the other relationships he had were really important throughout the pandemic, because it was, if you can imagine what it was, how isolating it was for all of us on a certain level, for him at Lake Forest when they locked down, it just was incredibly isolating. And there was a certain point where he had valve surgery, and then he couldn't really enjoy life because we were on lockdown. And so not only my friendship, but these other friendships and relationships that he maintained were just so important to him, and I think really added so much to his life. And he was so thrilled. We won an Emmy for the film, and we called him that evening at 10 o'clock, and he picked up, and he was so excited. And he said, we finally won something, you know, so, which we thought, we were really proud of just the film and of just being nominated, but we really, so thank goodness we actually won something. And then we had a special plaque made for him for the Emmy, and he was thrilled with that. And then 2 weeks before he passed, he received the Louis E. Avner Award from the Board of Regents of New York State for his contribution to Holocaust education. And so, and that was something that was, the wheels were started in motion by yet another friend. And these things were always things that were in the distance that he could look forward to. And I really just think that, you know, that he was always in the moment, and then sometimes looking a little bit ahead. And I think that made a difference in getting him to, you know, I wish he could have made it to 100, but couldn't.
And he did ask you before, and I'm not sure I heard the answer. What's next for you?
It's really important for me right now to have people read the book and still to see the movie. Like, the movie, I feel, is really evergreen, especially with the world being what it is. So just most efforts really are to promote the book, and to not promote it as entertainment, but to promote it as almost in the vein that he wanted, and which he says in the film, so that future generations understand that, you know, this could happen again anywhere, and that education is only just one portion of helping, you know, helping not prevent that, but it's a small thing that I can do going forward. So that's my short-term goal.
Thank you so much, Julie. And Julie, can we hear for a little bit to sign
Sure.
copies of books if people would like to? And so I do want to draw things to a close because I'd like her to have a chance to do that and still also make the 6:30. So let me just say thank you one more time to Julie and to Jonathan for that wonderful discussion. And thanks also to President Enyedi for being with us and starting things off today. I'd also like to thank a couple of the people who made this possible, including Mark Mastrion, Dan Mariano, Robert Richter, Jerry Ann Wright, and Heather Haskins, who are all a great help to us. And as always, I'd like to express my own gratitude to the Plattsburgh College Foundation and to its executive director, Ann Hansen, for all that they do to make events like this possible by getting us the support we need to be able to do them. So again, at 6:30 in Hudson Hall, in the big lecture room, 106, right next to the entrance to the planetarium. If you've been there before. There will be coffee there. There is also coffee here if you want to take it with you, so I won't feel too bad about having ordered service for 50. Okay. Thank you again, and thank you, Julie.
Thank you.